Bathing him was her job. Falling in love wasn't in the contract. The most beautiful love story. The mansion was imposing, perched high on a hill overlooking the rough South Carolina Sea. The sound of the waves crashing against the rocks echoed through the room, creating a striking contrast with the absolute silence of the estate. Anna Collins held tightly to the handle of her handbag as she waited at the huge carved wooden door. There was something frightening about the place. Not because of its grandeur, but because of the absence of life. Despite the perfectly trimmed gardens and impeccable windows, the house seemed empty. She adjusted the worn blazer she was wearing, one of the few formal outfits left over from her days at the hospital. With wages tight, every penny was dedicated to her daughter, Sophie, who needed new clothes and shoes more than she did. Anna took a deep breath, trying to remember the words of encouragement she had repeated to herself in the mirror that morning. "It's just another job, Anna. You've done it before. Nothing can be harder than what you've already faced." But inside, she knew it wasn't quite like that. Before she could step back, the door opened with a heavy creak. A slim, stern woman with her hair up in a tight bun stared at her from top to bottom. "Anna Collins." "Yes, it's me." "Come in, Mr. Carter is waiting for you." The woman, who introduced herself as Evelyn Carter, the patient's sister, led her down the main corridor. The inside of the mansion was even more intimidating than the outside. Dark wood-paneled walls, huge paintings of landscapes and old portraits hung from the walls, and the air carried a light scent of lemon and wax. Despite all the opulence, the atmosphere was cold, almost inhospitable. "Did you read the terms in the contract?" Evelyn asked without looking at her. "Yes, I did." "And did you understand that this job requires absolute dedication? Mr. Carter is not an easy man, and he doesn't tolerate mediocrity." Before I go on, tell me in the comments, which city are you watching this video from? It's always exciting to know how far our stories are reaching. Write in. I'd love to know. Got it. Anna held her voice steady, but her mind was already echoing the warnings she had heard from friends and former work colleagues. Matthew Carter, the reclusive billionaire who lost the movement in his legs in a tragic accident, had a frightening reputation. He was known for his coldness, for firing caregivers in a matter of weeks, sometimes days. For many, he was unmanageable. Evelyn stopped in front of a double door. "Remember, he doesn't want pity. He doesn't want condescension. He wants professionalism." She knocked once before opening the doors and entering without waiting for an answer. The office was spacious and minimalist. Sunlight filtered through the huge windows, highlighting the dark wood furniture and the unlit fireplace. Behind a huge desk sat Matthew Carter. He didn't turn to greet her, and his cold blue eyes fixed on Anna with an intensity that made her hesitate. He was exactly as the news had described him, an imposing man, even sitting in a wheelchair. His dark hair was perfectly cut. His face with its striking features seemed carved from marble, and his broad shoulders indicated that he hadn't let his physical condition defeat him completely. But his eyes, they were different, tired, as if they had seen more suffering than they should have. "You're number 8, he said, his voice deep and cutting. "Pardon?" "You're the 8th caregiver my sister has hired in less than a year. All the others have failed. What makes her think you'll be any different?" Anna swallowed. She knew the moment to prove herself would come, but she didn't expect it to be right away. "With all due respect, Mr. Carter, I'm not here to prove anything. I'm here because I'm good at what I do. I have 8 years' experience in caring for patients with spinal cord injuries. I know what you need, and I know what to do to make your life more comfortable." He arched an eyebrow, as if he hadn't expected such firmness. "Comfortable? What a convenient word. My comfort is irrelevant, Miss Collins. I want efficiency. I need someone who can do the job without trying to fix my life. Do you think you can do that? If you give me the opportunity, I can assure you that my actions will speak louder than words." The silence that followed was suffocating. Evelyn, who was standing next to Anna, seemed about to intervene, but Matthew raised his hand, asking for silence. He looked at her as if he were analyzing a candidate for a CEO position in a multi-million-dollar company, not a caregiver. "Do you have children?" he asked suddenly. The question caught her off guard. "Yes, I do. A daughter, Sophie. She's 9 years old." And how do you intend to reconcile working here, which requires you to live on the estate during the week, with your personal life? My daughter will stay with my mother on weekdays. We've discussed it as a family and we're prepared. Children rarely understand the meaning of sacrifice, he commented, looking out of the window. My daughter does, Anna replied, her voice firm, and she knows that everything I do is for her. The slight raise of his eyebrow indicated surprise, but he didn't reply immediately. After a few more seconds of analysis, he said, "You start on Monday. My sister will take care of the contract details." And with that, he turned to the window, ending the conversation. Anna left the office with Evelyn, her heart still racing. When they reached the entrance, Evelyn stopped. "He's hired you, but that doesn't mean it's going to be easy. My brother is a complicated man. If you need anything, you can come to me. Good luck, Miss Collins." In the car, as she drove home, Anna felt a huge weight on her chest. She had gotten the job. A job that would finally pay for the robotics lessons Sophie had dreamed of, that would guarantee a stability they hadn't had for years. But at the same time, something about that man disturbed her deeply. It wasn't just the coldness. It was the sadness she saw in his eyes, an emptiness that seemed unable to be filled. When she arrived at the small apartment she shared with Sophie, she found her daughter immersed in a science book, surrounded by pages of notes. Sophie looked at her with a bright smile. "You did it, didn't you, Mum?" "Yes, I did it." "Does this mean I can go to robotics camp in the summer?" "It means we can start planning," Anna replied, hugging her. But as she made dinner, her thoughts turned to Matthew Carter. What had happened to make him so bitter? What made him push so many people away? And above all, what would make her different? She didn't know it yet, but she felt that that mansion hid much more than it seemed to. Something in that house, and in that man, was about to change her life forever. And as night fell, illuminating the streets of Charleston with a soft golden light, Anna couldn't shake the feeling that the real fight was yet to come. The next morning, Anna parked her car on the gravel driveway of the Carter mansion, watching for a moment as the sun began to shine through the trees. The sea was rougher than the day before, and the waves were crashing hard on the rocks below. She slung her bag over her shoulder, took a deep breath and opened the car door, the sound of the gravel beneath her feet echoing in her ears. It was her first day at work, and even after spending the whole night thinking about every word Matthew Carter had said, she didn't feel fully prepared for what awaited her. The door to the mansion was opened before she could knock, and Evelyn Carter, looking impeccable in a navy blue suit, appeared in the doorway. Her gaze was more serious than the day before, as if something was already wrong before Anna even started. "You're on time. Good start," said Evelyn, moving aside to let her in. "Mr. Carter's breakfast should be served in exactly 15 minutes. He hates delays." "Understood." Anna walked past the woman, maintaining her professional posture, but feeling the weight of judgment in the air. Evelyn led her into the kitchen, a vast room full of white marble and stainless steel that looked like it had come out of a design magazine. Anna didn't know where to begin to locate herself when Evelyn pointed to a plate already set up on the counter. "He only eats scrambled eggs with wholemeal toast in the morning. The coffee is ready. Our maid has already prepared it. Take it to his office. And a warning, he'll be in a bad mood, as usual." "Did something specific bother you?" Anna asked, trying to hide her nervousness. "Something specific always bothers him." Evelyn left the kitchen without another word, leaving Anna alone with the silence of the house. Carrying the tray carefully, Anna climbed the stairs towards the office where she had been the day before. Each step seemed heavier, as if she were going to a trial. When she reached the door, she knocked softly and waited. "Come in." Matthew's voice, deep and distant, sounded from inside. Anna entered and found him in the same position as the day before, sitting behind his desk, but now with papers spread out in front of him and an even more closed expression. "Good morning, Mr. Carter." She placed the tray on the side table with precision and maintained her posture. "I hope the eggs are to your liking." He raised his eyes to her, but said nothing for a moment. Then he pointed to the wooden clock on his desk. "It's 2 minutes early. I hope that's not a pattern." Anna blinked in surprise. Was he serious? "I prefer everything to be done at the right time. Not before, not after," he continued, turning his attention back to the papers. "I'll adjust that in the future." She kept her voice calm, determined not to get into a confrontation. The silence between them was almost suffocating, but Anna knew she had to fill the space somehow. Looking at the papers in front of her, she couldn't help but notice something curious. Blueprints of some kind, full of technical diagrams and numbers that seemed complex, even to someone used to medical reports. "These projects are interesting," she commented without thinking, but immediately regretted it when he raised his eyes again, his gaze narrowing. "Interesting." He let out a short, cold laugh. "Interesting isn't exactly what I'd call a failure." Anna didn't reply, but her silence seemed to encourage him to continue. "These are the remains of a startup that I abandoned after the accident. Do you understand the concept of irrelevance, Miss Collins? Because that's exactly what they are." There was something in his voice, something that went beyond sarcasm or bitterness. It was pain. "I understand that not all failure is permanent," she said calmly, surprising herself. Matthew tilted his head, as if he hadn't expected such a response, but didn't say anything else. He just picked up his fork and started eating, indicating that the conversation was over. When she left the office, the tension in her chest finally eased, but something in her eyes, that glint of defeat and resentment, remained in her mind. Why did he keep those projects if they were so irrelevant? Anna spent the rest of the morning exploring the house, familiarizing herself with the rooms and the routines, while trying to ignore the discomfort that seemed to permeate the walls. The house was spotless, but there was something about it, an emptiness that was hard to explain. Around midday, while she was in the kitchen organizing lunch with the maid, Anna heard the sound of something heavy falling upstairs. The noise echoed through the house, making her heart race. She dropped the knife she was holding and ran up the steps 2 by 2. The sound seemed to be coming from one of the bedrooms. When she opened the door, she found Matthew on the floor, his wheelchair overturned beside him. "Mr. Carter." Anna rushed over to him, kneeling beside him. "What happened?" "I lost control," he said between his teeth, clearly more annoyed than hurt. "Are you hurt?" "My pride is," he muttered. Anna examined him quickly, checking for signs of injury, but he pushed her hands away impatiently. "I said I'm fine." "Then let me help you back into the chair," she insisted, ignoring his resistance. He hesitated, but finally gave in. "You really aren't going to give up, are you?" "I wasn't hired to give up," she replied, adjusting the wheelchair and carefully helping him to his feet. When he was finally sitting down again, Matthew ran a hand through his hair, visibly frustrated with himself. "Don't mention this to my sister." "I don't need to report something I can handle myself," she said, but there was something in her voice that made him look at her more closely. Anna felt his heavy gaze on her, but she didn't flinch. For a moment, it seemed as if he wanted to say something, but then he looked away. "Don't get used to it," he said simply. "To what?" "With me accepting your help." Anna didn't reply, but the weight of that exchange stayed with her for the rest of the day. She knew that this was only the beginning. Matthew Carter was hiding much more than he let on, and when she went downstairs to continue her chores, she passed the corridor that led to a locked door. It was a different door from the others, smaller, almost discreet, but something about it seemed to beckon her, as if it were hiding something important. She stopped for a moment, feeling an unexpected chill. "Miss Collins!" Evelyn's voice sounded behind her, making her turn quickly. "Yes?" "Why are you standing there? The office door is the other way." Anna glanced at the door once more before replying, "I was just locating myself." Evelyn watched her with a calculating gaze before simply shaking her head and walking away. As Anna walked back into the kitchen, one thought kept running through her mind. What was behind that door? The first few weeks passed like a blur for Anna. Between the exhausting routine of looking after Matthew Carter and the constant video calls to Sophie, she barely had time to think about herself. Yet she had survived. Evelyn Carter, although distant, made a point of reminding her often, "You're doing better than the other 7 carers, keep it up." It was a compliment, even if it sounded more like a warning. Matthew, on the other hand, didn't make things easy. He was demanding, perfectionist, and reserved to the extreme. He didn't like to talk about himself, and any attempt at light conversation was met with prolonged silence or sharp responses. But even so, Anna noticed small changes. He no longer complained so much about her presence, and even accepted her occasional suggestions about adjustments to the physiotherapy routine. The only space that remained an absolute mystery was the locked room at the end of the corridor. Anna passed that door every day as she went back and forth between the bedrooms and the other areas of the house, and always felt the same chill run down her spine. There was something unsettling about that place, something that seemed to whisper hidden secrets. One day, while tidying up the kitchen after dinner, Anna decided to ask Clara, the housekeeper. "Clara, how long have you worked here?" "4 years. And do you know what's in that locked room upstairs?" Clara stopped what she was doing and looked at Anna with a puzzled expression. "At the end of the corridor?" "I don't know anything, ma'am. Mr. Carter never lets anyone in there, not even Mrs. Evelyn." "No one?" Clara shook her head, visibly uncomfortable. "I don't ask about things that don't concern me. A word of advice, ma'am. Perhaps you'd better not ask either." Anna thanked her and let the subject die there, but it only increased her curiosity. Why did Matthew keep that room locked? And what was in there that even Evelyn couldn't access? The days went by, but one morning, Anna realized that something was wrong. Sophie, always animated in her video calls, looked tired and pale. "Are you all right, darling?" Anna asked, worried. I have a bit of a headache, Mommy. Grandma says it's just the heat." But Anna knew it wasn't just that. Sophie was strong and rarely complained about anything. During the day, she couldn't shake thoughts of her daughter, and while she was helping Matthew with his routine, her mind was miles away, worrying about Sophie. "Miss Collins," Matthew's voice cut through the silence. "Yes?" He looked at her with a gaze that was neither cold nor distant. It was something different. "Something's wrong." She hesitated, surprised by the remark. "Why do you ask?" "You're acting strange, more distracted." "What happened?" Anna blinked, not knowing what to say. Was Matthew Carter, the man who showed no interest in anyone but himself, worried? "My daughter isn't feeling well," she finally admitted, still trying to understand the sudden change of tone. He remained silent, his gaze fixed on something other than her. After a few seconds, he said, "Do you have a photo of her?" Anna, even more confused, took her phone out of her pocket and found a photo of Sophie taken a few weeks ago. "Here." "That's her." Matthew took the phone, examining the picture carefully. "She looks smart." "She is. Sophie is passionate about robotics. She's already told me that she wants to create robots that can help people in the future." He handed the phone back without saying anything, but his face was serious, thoughtful. "Mr. Carter?" Anna asked, trying to decipher his expression. "That will be all, Miss Collins. You can leave." Anna stood still for a moment, surprised at his abruptness. She thought he was beginning to open up, but it seemed as if he had gone back into his shell. During the shower that evening, Matthew seemed more withdrawn than usual. He avoided eye contact while Anna adjusted the water and organized the items in the bathroom. "Arms up," she said in the professional tone she always used to keep him comfortable. Matthew obeyed, but his face was rigid. Anna knew he hated this part of the routine. It wasn't just the physical discomfort, it was the fact that he needed someone to help him. "You're quiet today too," she commented as she helped him transfer to the shower chair. "I'm not used to having someone notice that," he replied, without looking at her. Anna paused for a moment, trying to decide whether or not to continue the conversation. But before she could say anything, he added, "Do you know why all the other carers gave up?" She shook her head. "Because it's not just the physical work that's hard, it's dealing with it." He gestured to himself, with the idea that I'm no longer whole. Anna wanted to say something, but he held up his hand, indicating that the conversation was over. She continued to help him in silence, but his words kept echoing in her mind. That evening, after making sure Matthew was comfortable and that everything was in place, Anna passed through the corridor once more. Her eyes were drawn as always to the locked door, but this time something seemed different. The doorknob glowed in the dim light of the corridor, as if inviting her in. Anna hesitated, looking around to make sure Evelyn or Clara weren't around. She approached and with a trembling hand tried to turn the knob, but before she could make any progress, Matthew's voice echoed down the corridor, chilling her to the bone. "Miss Collins, don't you dare enter that room without my permission." She turned, finding him at the end of the corridor, sitting in his wheelchair. His expression was hard, almost menacing. I know what you were trying to do." He approached slowly, his eyes fixed on her. "If you want to continue working here, know this. Some things must remain closed, understand?" Anna swallowed, nodding. "Good," he said, turning in his chair and walking away. But as he disappeared into the darkness of the corridor, Anna couldn't shake the feeling that there was something about that door that she needed to find out. Something Matthew didn't want anyone to see. And now, more than ever, she was determined to find out what it was. The next few days were especially difficult for Anna. Sophie was still ill, and even though her mother insisted that it was something temporary, Anna felt that there was something more. In the video calls, the girl seemed paler, without energy, and the anxiety of not being by her daughter's side consumed Anna inside. Matthew noticed. Even though he wasn't someone who showed concern easily, he noticed Anna's hurried steps, her short answers, and the way she frequently checked her phone. During breakfast, while she was organizing his medicines, he finally broke the silence. "Miss Collins." Anna looked up, expecting the next criticism, but Matthew's tone was different. "You're clearly worried about something. I suggest you sort it out. Is it still about your daughter?" Anna hesitated, surprised by the sudden show of interest. "Yes, my daughter isn't well, as I mentioned. She's still not better, and I should be with her." Matthew raised an eyebrow. "Then go." Anna blinked, confused. "Excuse me?" "You heard me. Go on. Spend the day with your daughter." He turned his attention back to the plate in front of him, as if it were no big deal. "But what about you, your routine?" Matthew let out an impatient sigh. "Miss Collins, you're distracted. It affects your work. Go and see your daughter, and if necessary, bring her here. I'm not going to die because of a few days with a child in the house. It might even improve the mood." The proposal took Anna completely by surprise. Matthew Carter, the man who rarely showed empathy for anyone, was allowing his daughter to come to the mansion. Clara, the maid, who had overheard the conversation, could barely hide her astonishment, and Evelyn, who appeared shortly afterwards, looked even more suspicious. "Did you really agree to this, Matthew?" Evelyn asked later that day, crossing her arms as he looked at the papers on his desk. "Yes." "That's unusual coming from you. I hope you know what you're doing." "I always know what I'm doing, Evelyn." The next morning, Anna returned to the mansion accompanied by Sophie. The little girl, despite her obvious tiredness, couldn't hide her fascination at seeing the house for the first time. "Wow, Mom, it looks like a castle," Sophie exclaimed as she looked around the huge foyer. "It's just a house, darling," Anna replied, holding her daughter's hand, although she herself still found the mansion intimidating. Matthew was waiting in the living room when they arrived. When he saw Sophie, he kept his expression serious, but his eyes revealed something else, perhaps curiosity or an interest he rarely showed. "Sophie," Anna began, "this is Mr. Carter." "Hi, Mr. Carter." Sophie looked at him with curious, sparkling eyes, but there was no sign of discomfort or fear. Matthew watched her for a moment before speaking. "You're smaller than I expected." Sophie laughed. "I think I am, yes. My mother said I still have time to grow up." The unexpected answer drew a discreet smile from Matthew, which surprised both Anna and Evelyn, who were watching the interaction from afar. Later that day, Sophie rested on the sofa in the library, while Anna organized some medicines in Matthew's office. He, however, seemed distracted, staring at the window and thinking about something. "She's very lively, even though she's ill," he commented suddenly. "Sophie's like that. She always tries to find something positive in everything," Anna replied, without lifting her eyes from what she was doing. Matthew remained silent for a moment before asking, "Does she still want to build robots?" Anna looked at him, surprised that he remembered. "Yes, it's her biggest dream. She spends hours reading books about robotics and programming." "Did she mention anything about projects?" "She wants to create robots that help people. She said it would be a way to change the world." Matthew just nodded, his eyes settling on the window again. He seemed about to say something, but changed his mind. In the early evening, while Sophie was reading one of her books, Matthew went down the mansion's elevator and appeared in the library. He watched her for a moment before finally speaking. "Sophie." She looked up, surprised but excited. "Yes, Mr. Carter? Would you like to see something?" Anna, who had just entered the room, froze when she heard the question. "What do you want to show her?" Anna asked cautiously. Matthew ignored her and turned directly to Sophie. "Do you want to see it or not?" Sophie looked at her mother, who hesitated before nodding. "Fine, but stay close to him." Matthew motioned for Sophie to follow him. She held his hand for a moment, helping him maneuver his wheelchair down the corridor. Anna followed but stopped when she saw them approaching the locked door. "Mr. Carter," she began, but he interrupted. "Relax, Miss Collins. It's just an office." Anna grew restless as she watched Matthew open the door with a key he took from his pocket. Sophie entered with him, and the door closed behind them, leaving Anna alone in the corridor with her worries. When they finally came out, Sophie was trying to hide her excited expression, but there was something else on her face. A deep sadness that Anna couldn't understand. "Sophie, is everything all right?" Anna asked immediately. "Yes, Mom." "What was in there?" Sophie shook her head quickly. "I can't say. I promised Mr. Carter it would be a secret, but at some point you'll find out." Her daughter's mysterious tone only increased Anna's unease. Later that evening, while Anna was organizing Matthew's medication in the study, she heard a strange sound coming from his room. Worried, she rushed there and found Matthew sweating, his breath panting. "Mr. Carter?" He tried to wave his hand, indicating that he was fine, but she didn't believe him. "You have a fever. You need help." He tried to refuse, but couldn't. Anna helped him sit up better in bed, adjusted his temperature, and checked his vital signs. While she was doing this, Sophie appeared in the doorway holding a glass of water. "Can I help you?" the girl asked, concerned. Matthew looked at her, surprised, but said nothing. Hannah accepted the glass and thanked her daughter, who stayed by her mother's side, watching her every move. "You're getting better, Mr. Carter," Sophie said softly. "Sometimes things have to get worse before they get better. I was bad myself until I got here. I feel much better around my mother who loves me so much. Sometimes that's all we need, to feel loved." The girl's words seemed to hit something in Matthew. He didn't reply, but his gaze fixed on her said more than words could. As the crisis passed, Anna realized something. Matthew was changing. He was no longer the cold man she had known, but someone who was beginning to allow little cracks in his walls. What she didn't yet know was how much these changes would bring them closer together. In the days that followed, the usual silence of the Carter mansion was replaced by something completely different: laughter, coming surprisingly from Matthew's office. Sophie would spend hours next to him, sitting in a chair that was too big for her small body, her eyes shining with enthusiasm. Matthew explained robotics concepts with a patience that no one would believe he possessed. He showed her schematics, made detailed notes, and even allowed her to tinker with some old devices he had kept from his previous life. "Do you understand this?" he asked one afternoon, arching an eyebrow as Sophie tilted her head to analyze a diagram. "Yes," she replied enthusiastically. "It's like programming a movement for the robot, but you have to think about how the motor will react. That's amazing." Matthew smiled, a genuine, rare smile that left Anna, who was watching from afar, completely speechless. "I told you she was special," Anna once remarked, walking into the office to bring Sophie a snack. Matthew didn't reply immediately. He just looked at the girl, who was busy scribbling something on a notepad, and shook his head. "Not very special." Evelyn, who usually observed the interactions from a distance, was visibly disconcerted. "He never acts like that," said Anna one day, while Matthew and Sophie were so involved in a discussion about algorithms that they didn't notice anyone around. Not even before the accident. It's as if she got something out of him that no one else could. Clara, the maid, who was passing through the hallway carrying a cleaning bucket, agreed. "I've never heard Mr. Carter laugh like that. Never in the 4 years I've been here." Anna just smiled, although inside she was just as impressed. Matthew was changing. He was no longer the cold, closed-off man she had known. Next to Sophie, he seemed alive. But all good things come to an end, at least temporarily. The day came for Sophie to return to her grandmother's house. The girl, although reluctant, understood that she had to go back to school and to lessons. In the morning, while Anna was preparing her bags, Sophie popped into Matthew's office to say goodbye. "Do you really have to go?" he asked, trying to hide his disappointment. "My mom says I have to study, but I'll be back at the weekend if I can." Matthew crossed his arms, pretending to consider the proposal. "Only if you bring your notes. I can't see you forgetting everything you've learned here." "Deal," Sophie replied with a broad smile. When Anna came in to collect her, she noticed that Matthew was quieter, his gaze distant. Even though he didn't say anything, it was clear to her that he didn't want Sophie to leave. As Sophie said goodbye, he finally said, "Come back at the weekend. I'm going to need help with a project." Anna noticed the effort in his words and felt a pang of something she couldn't explain. "She'll be here," Anna replied, and Matthew's shy smile surprised her again. The next day, the mansion returned to its usual silence. Matthew was in the study, but he didn't seem interested in anything. He stared at the papers in front of him as if they were written in another language. Anna realized that something was wrong. He was quiet, but not in the usual way. His posture was tense, his fingers tapped incessantly on the table, and he seemed to be trapped in his own thoughts. "Mr. Carter," Anna said, entering the office with a cup of tea in her hands. He didn't reply, but she approached anyway, placing the tea on his desk. "Do you want to talk?" Matthew looked up at her, his jaw clenched. He hesitated, as if considering whether or not to open up, but finally let out a heavy sigh. "Miss Collins, come with me." The change in his tone and posture took Anna by surprise. He turned the wheelchair around and started to leave the office, leaving her with no choice but to follow him. They walked in silence through the halls of the mansion until he stopped in front of the locked door at the end of the corridor. Anna froze. It was that door. The door that had fed her curiosity for weeks, and which he had told her so many times not to touch. Matthew took a key out of his pocket and slowly opened the door. "Come in," he said, moving his chair aside so that she could pass. Anna hesitated, but finally entered. The air in the room seemed heavier, as if it held years of memories. The walls were covered with thousands of photos, newspaper clippings, handwritten notes and diagrams. It was a chaotic and disturbing sight. Anna approached one of the walls, taking a closer look. "Mr. Carter," Anna began, but her voice failed her. She turned to him, who was standing in the middle of the room watching her intently. "What's all this?" Matthew tilted his head, his eyes fixed on her. "This," he finally said, "is what's left of what I had and who I was before the accident." Anna was silent, not knowing how to respond. The silence in the room was overwhelming, charged with memories that Anna didn't even fully understand. Matthew remained motionless in his chair, his gaze fixed on a distant point on the wall, covered in photos and clippings. With each heavy breath, she realized that he was fighting an internal battle to decide whether or not to continue talking. Finally, his voice broke the silence, but it was a whisper full of pain. "I had a wife and a daughter." Anna looked up at him in surprise. She had never heard anything about this before. The mansion had no family photos, no evidence of a past life. Everything reminiscent of the past was apparently only in that space. "Melanie," he continued, his voice breaking. "My little girl, she was the most incredible person I've ever met. She was so intelligent, curious, full of life." He paused, his fingers drumming on the arm of his wheelchair. "And my wife, Claire, she was my balance. She was the person who kept me connected to what really mattered, because I was always stuck at work." Anna leaned forward a little, feeling the weight of each word. "I was working all the time," Matthew admitted, his voice becoming more bitter. "I was building my empire, trying to make sure Melanie had everything she needed in the future. I always told myself it was for her, but deep down, it was for me. I liked the feeling of control, of power. And all the while I was neglecting what really mattered." He closed his eyes as if trying to shut out the memories, but the words kept coming out. "Melanie wanted my attention. She would draw pictures for me, show me her ideas for robots that would help people. She always said, 'Daddy, one day I'm going to build something that's going to change the world.' And you know what I'd do? I'd give him a quick smile, say how proud I was, and go back to my emails. Anna felt a tightness in her chest. He wasn't just talking to her, he was venting to himself, revisiting all the open wounds. It was a Saturday, he continued, now looking directly at the wall full of photos. Claire convinced me to take a day off to go to the beach. Melanie was so excited. She had built a model robot out of scrap metal and wanted to show me how it worked. His voice faltered, and he needed a few seconds before continuing. I remember her running to the car with that huge smile. And I remember Claire laughing, saying that I needed to relax more. It was the last sound I heard before. He stopped suddenly, as if the words had got stuck in his throat. Anna remained quiet, knowing that he needed time to continue. The truck driver was tired, he finally said, his voice lower. I remember the pain, the smell of gasoline, the sound of breaking glass. He rubbed his temples hard, as if trying to erase those images from his mind. When I woke up in hospital, they told me that Claire and Melanie hadn't survived, but I did. Anna felt her eyes water as she listened. Matthew looked at her, and there was something in his face, a raw vulnerability she had never seen before. I survived, but I was stuck with it. He gestured to the wheelchair. And worse, I got stuck with the guilt. Because if I'd said no to that ride, if I'd driven instead of Claire, if I hadn't neglected so much time with Melanie, maybe none of this would have happened. He pointed to the wall where there was a large photo of a smiling girl with light brown hair and eyes that seemed to sparkle with intelligence. I made this room for them. I collected everything that reminded me of who they were. Their ideas, their drawings, the news about startups that inspired me when I still had the strength to carry on. And every day, I come in here to remind myself of what I've lost. To punish myself for letting what really mattered slip through my fingers. Anna felt the tears run silently down her face. But then, Matthew continued, looking directly at her, Sophie appeared. When she walked into this house, it was as if I'd been transported back in time. She has the same curiosity, the same brilliant intelligence, the way she talks about robotics, about wanting to create something that helps people. It's like listening to Melanie all over again. He paused for a moment, taking courage before saying, I blamed myself for so long that I thought I'd never be able to feel anything but regret. But Sophie, she gave me hope, a reason to look forward instead of being stuck in the past. Matthew then looked at Anna with an intensity that made her heart soar. I want to help you, Miss Collins. I want to fund Sophie's studies, everything she needs to achieve her dreams. I want her to have the opportunities that I didn't have time to give my daughter. It's the least I can do. Anna opened her mouth to reply, but he grabbed her hand before she could speak. And I want to thank you, he said, his voice trembling slightly, for showing up in my life, for bringing Sophie here. You two brought something I thought I'd never have again. Purpose. Anna didn't know what to say. For years she had lived only to work, to support Sophie, without ever stopping to think about herself. She had never imagined that she could mean so much in someone else's life, let alone someone like Matthew Carter. The two of them remained silent, hands clasped. The days passed, and Anna remembered that conversation every now and then. Now she understood that behind that closed-off man, there was a bruised heart full of guilt. It was the weekend, and Sophie had arrived. The girl entered the mansion with the renewed energy that Anna knew only she could have. Clara welcomed her with a smile, and Evelyn appeared at the top of the stairs, watching with a look that was half approval, half bewilderment. Matthew was in the library but asked for Sophie as soon as she arrived. Anna watched as the girl hurried up the stairs, eager to meet him again. A few minutes later, Matthew was sitting in his chair with Sophie by his side, both with notebooks and drawings spread out on the table. The connection between the two was palpable, almost magical. Anna, watching from afar, felt a squeeze in her heart. Matthew was transforming before her eyes, and somehow so was she. And as she watched Matthew talking to Sophie, Anna wondered what he had planned for that weekend. Sophie was leaning over one of the projects they had started together. It was a simple idea for a robot to help elderly people pick up objects from the floor, but for her, it was like building something revolutionary. Matthew, for his part, was poring over the blueprints, laughing at Sophie's every enthusiastic comment. "Are you sure this is going to work, Mr. Carter?" Sophie asked, frowning as she adjusted one of the pieces of the drawing. "If you think it's going to work, that's a good start," he replied, smiling. Anna, watching everything from the doorway, could hardly believe the man in front of her. Matthew Carter, once cold and reclusive, now looked like a devoted mentor, laughing as if he didn't have a care in the world. Not only had he found purpose in helping Sophie, but he also seemed to be rediscovering parts of himself. Sophie suddenly put down her pencil and looked at Matthew with a twinkle in her eye. "Mr. Carter, have you ever seen the sea up close? I mean, here on the promenade?" Matthew paused for a moment, surprised by the question. "It's been years," he finally replied. "The last time was right before the accident." Sophie widened her eyes, as if that was the most absurd thing she'd ever heard. "That's awful. You need to go. It's so beautiful out there with the wind, the waves." Matthew laughed at her indignation. "Sophie, I'm not exactly a promenade person." "You can be," she insisted, slamming her hands on the table, "and we can go with you." Anna entered the office at that moment, overhearing the end of the conversation. "I don't know if that's such a good idea," Matthew began, but Sophie didn't let him finish. "Please, Mr. Carter, just once. I promise it'll be fun." Matthew looked at her, then at Anna, who was smiling softly. He sighed, defeated. "All right, but only because you won't leave me alone." News of the outing soon spread around the house, and Clara and Evelyn were shocked. "He's going out for a walk?" Evelyn asked, incredulous. "Matthew never does that." "Not even when I insist," Clara added, shaking her head. "That girl has magical powers, I swear." The afternoon was dedicated to getting everything ready. Anna helped Matthew choose comfortable clothes, and Sophie was in charge of getting a blanket and snacks. Evelyn, surprised as she was, helped discreetly, making sure the adapted van was ready for the journey. When they finally reached the promenade, Matthew looked visibly nervous. The noise of the people, the laughter, and the sound of the waves breaking on the rocks had taken him out of his comfort zone, but the presence of Anna and Sophie seemed to calm him down. They found a quiet spot by the sea where they could watch the waves up close. Sophie ran to the ledge, stretching out her arms to feel the wind. "This is amazing," she shouted, and Matthew couldn't help but smile. "It's been a long time, hasn't it?" Anna asked, sitting down next to him and looking out to sea. "It feels like a lifetime," he replied, but there was something different in his tone, no longer bitterness, but a trace of hope. Sophie ran back and sat down on the floor next to him. "Mr. Carter, you're the nicest person I've ever met." Matthew arched an eyebrow, clearly surprised. "Is that so?" "Yes, only not nicer than my mother and grandmother," she added, laughing. Anna tried to hold back her laughter, but Matthew looked at her just then, and something in his gaze completely disarmed her. It was as if he was recognizing something he couldn't put into words, a deep connection that was growing between them. Over the next few days, life at the mansion became even livelier. Matthew began to invest in Sophie's dreams in earnest. He bought books, robotics kits, and even a small 3D printer so that she could put her ideas into practice. "You didn't really need to do all that," Anna said to him one evening as she watched him show Sophie how to assemble a part on the computer. "Of course I did," he replied simply, without taking his eyes off the screen. "She has a talent that can't be wasted." But it wasn't just the money that impressed Anna. It was the quality time he devoted to Sophie, the long conversations, the laughter, and the genuine care in teaching her. One night, after Sophie had gone to bed, Matthew got into the mansion's elevator, went downstairs, and found Anna in the kitchen, finishing organizing some things. He looked hesitant but determined. "Anna," he began, "I was thinking about something." "Go on," she replied, turning to him. "Sophie should live here." Anna blinked, surprised. "What?" "The school she's going to is closer to the mansion than to her mother's house, and to be honest, I want her to have access to everything she needs to develop her potential. Besides," he hesitated for a moment before continuing, "she's good for me." Anna felt her eyes water. "Matthew, that's too generous." "It's not generosity," he replied, his voice low. "It's something I want to do. I have to." When Anna told Sophie the news, the girl was overjoyed. "I'm going to live in the castle," she shouted, running to hug her mother. Anna laughed, but her heart was full of gratitude. When she looked at Matthew, he just smiled, as if he was pleased to see Sophie so happy. That night, while Sophie slept in the guest room that would become their new living space, Matthew called Anna into the study to talk. When she entered, he was standing with his back to the door, staring at the same wall that had so often held his pain. "You wanted to talk to me?" she asked, slowly approaching. Matthew turned to face her. For a moment he said nothing, just watched her, as if gathering his courage. "Anna," he began, his voice softer than she had ever heard it. "I don't know how to say this, so I'll be direct. I don't want to lose you, not Sophie." She fell silent, her heart racing. "For years, I've lived stuck in the past, punishing myself for what I've lost. But you and Sophie, you brought something into my life that I didn't even know I could still feel. You gave me hope, and I need you to stay." Anna felt tears run down her face. "I want to be what I wasn't in the past," he continued, his voice firm, but his eyes shining with emotion. "I want to take care of you. I want to be better, not just for me, but for you." "Matthew," she whispered, speechless. "You're the best thing that's happened in my life in years," he said, his voice trembling. "And I never want to let anything important slip through my fingers again." Anna couldn't hold back the tears any longer. "You have no idea how much this means to me." He approached her slowly, holding her hand carefully. "Then stay," he whispered. The Carter mansion, once a place of silence and shadows, had been transformed. Now laughter echoed through the corridors, the sound of animated conversations filled the once empty spaces, and even the air seemed lighter. Evelyn watched everything with a constant smile, something Anna had never seen before. "It's like the house has come back to life," Evelyn commented one morning as she helped Clara set the table for breakfast. "I never thought I'd see Matthew like this again." "Neither did I," Clara replied, laughing as Sophie came into the kitchen and hugged her. "That girl is a miracle. I don't know what you did, but whatever it was, it worked, Miss Sophie." Sophie laughed, her eyes sparkling. "I just did it myself." Everyone laughed, but Anna knew it was so much more. Sophie's presence had been the spark that reignited something in Matthew, but what really kept him going was the deep connection he had created with the girl and with herself. Matthew, who used to spend hours in his office or locked room, now spent his days involved in family life. He and Sophie worked together on robotics projects, played in the garden, and even had an inside joke routine that made everyone around them laugh. Anna watched everything with a full heart. He wasn't just a mentor or an investor in Sophie's dreams. He was a father figure, something Sophie had never had before. "You know that means the world to her, right?" Anna said to him one night while Sophie slept. Matthew looked at Anna with the same intensity that always disarmed her. "And me too." Over time, Anna and Matthew became inseparable. Their relationship was built on trust, respect, and most importantly, love. She was everything he needed, strong, understanding, and his biggest supporter. And he, in turn, was the companion she never imagined she would find. Someone who not only admired her, but made her feel valued every day. After months of living as a family, Matthew made a decision that would change everything. He wanted to marry Anna. The wedding was planned to be an intimate ceremony, just for close friends and family. They decided that the garden of the mansion, now full of life, would be the perfect place. On the day of the ceremony, the sun shone softly, illuminating every corner of the garden, decorated with white flowers and shades of green. Sophie, in a light blue bridesmaid's dress, looked like a princess as she held the flowers with a broad smile. "How you look beautiful, darling," Anna said, fixing Sophie's hair before walking up the aisle. "You look more beautiful, Mom," Sophie replied, hugging her. "I'm so happy for you." While the guests took their seats, Matthew waited at the altar. He looked impeccable in a grey suit, but what really caught the eye was the smile on his face, a smile full of peace and happiness, something he hadn't felt for years. When Anna emerged, walking down the makeshift corridor with Sophie by her side, Matthew felt his heart race. She looked stunning, and he knew, without a shadow of a doubt, that this was a very important moment in his life. After the vows had been exchanged and the rings placed, Matthew asked for a moment before the final kiss. He looked at Anna with eyes full of emotion and took her hands. "Anna," he began, his voice firm but laden with feeling. I'm not good with words, but you deserve to hear what I'm feeling. For too long I've been stuck in a past full of regret and pain. I thought I would never have a second chance at happiness, that everything I was lost in that accident." He paused, his gaze fixed on hers. "But then you came along. With your strength, your courage, and your huge heart, you brought light to my darkest days. And Sophie," he looked at the girl, who was smiling with watery eyes, "she gave me a reason to believe that there was still beauty in the world, that I still had something to offer." Anna squeezed his hands, struggling to hold back the tears. "I don't want to spend another day of my life without you and Sophie. You've not only brought joy into my life, but you've taught me to love again, to dream again. Anna Collins, you're the best thing that's happened to me in years, and I promise to be the man you deserve every day of my life." The guests, visibly moved, applauded as Anna cried and smiled at the same time. "I love you, Matthew Carter," she replied, her voice trembling. He smiled and whispered, "Then kiss me, Miss Collins. Let's start our new life." She leaned over and kissed him, to the applause and tears of her friends and family. Sophie ran to hug them soon after, laughing and saying, "You're the best in the world. If you enjoyed this heartwarming story, don't forget to like the video and rate it from 0 to 10 in the comments, so I know what kind of story you like. Oh, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss anything new. Also watch the next video that appears on your screen now. Your participation is very important so that we can continue to bring you more stories like this. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next video.